Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's keynote panel. My name is Angelica Gonzalez. I am professor of biomedical engineering, head of Davenport College, but also have the honor of serving as faculty director to Sci-City. We're thrilled to have three incredible entrepreneurs with us. Each founder graduated from Yale and participated in various iterations of the Fellows Summer Program. They bring unique perspectives on their entrepreneurial journeys, and all three work in different industries. And yet, their stories have many common threads. Let's get to know them a bit better before we dive into the conversation. First, we have Ben Young, co-founder of Hugo and Hoby, a local and fully customizable and sustainable furniture company. Erika Hairston, co-founder of EdLyft, a software company that helps to train computer science students on essential job skills. Notably, EdLyft AI tutorial has sold recently to Google, been acquired by Google. A notable accomplishment, right?
Yes.
And last but certainly not least, Rachel Laryea, founder of Kelewele, a cultural lifestyle brand reimagining plantains and its commitment to connecting to the African diaspora through food, culture, and innovation. And again, most recently, author of Black Capitalists, which will be out in your local bookstores June 2025.
Yes.
Yes. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. Would you mind if we went down the line and you could each tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. My name is Ben Young. I'm one of the owners and co-founders of Hugo and Hoby. And I grew up in Washington, D.C., went to Swarthmore College, and I became a high school math teacher for 5 years. After graduating, I taught kind of like every high school math course in the books and coached soccer and lacrosse. And I've always been interested in business and entrepreneurship and starting a company. And I was interested in actually starting a business in the education space, and I decided to apply for business school, and got accepted to Yale and was very excited. And I met my co-founder who's sitting out there, Fred, and he became my roommate. We had no intent of starting a furniture company, but we were building desks and tables and things in our basement of our East Rock apartment, and kind of hatched the idea for Hugo and Hoby, and went through a lot of Yale's programs, and here we are today, 10 years later, which is kind of wild. We were like right at the beginning of Startup Yale, and now we're 10 years later, still building furniture for commercial spaces.
That's amazing.
Very cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Erika Hairston. I was Yale College 2018, so I was in TD. I don't know if there's any undergrad. Okay, I got one. But I'm born and raised from New Jersey. I studied computer science and African American studies at Yale. And I actually would not have become a founder had it not been for Yale and an alumni who pulled me out of the crowd of a talk just like this and sat me down. And so we'll get into the questions. But prior to starting my company, EdLyft, I was a product manager at LinkedIn. And then before that, did some software engineering at Facebook. So deep into Silicon Valley, and excited to chat with you all today.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Laryea. Born and raised in Northern Virginia and Ghana, where I'm a dual citizen. I went to undergrad at NYU, where I was studying social and cultural analysis, and continue that trajectory, even though kind of had a stint in finance, or was at Goldman Sachs for a while. Then, came to Yale to do my doctorate in anthropology and African American studies. And it was while I was here that I just really wanted to explore, and that was the birth of Kelewele, what it means to kind of be at the intersection of culture, food, and community. And I kind of got the catalyst to build the business through my anthropological studies while I was here. So I've been doing and running Kelewele since 2018, and also work at JP Chase. So I've done my return back to finance, where I'm a researcher in asset wealth management.
Goodness. Again, varied experiences and varied backgrounds. So maybe if you could tell us a little bit, or we could dig in a little bit more into the start of your innovation in your company. Where really did you start to invest in your culture and bring your culture into the idea of a startup, a product that you wanted to build? Where did you find the idea that computer science and your background from education was where you were going to invest your entrepreneurial skills? And likewise, how did you go from being a math teacher to becoming an entrepreneur and innovator?
Someone go first?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, sure. So yeah, I think for, I was like really observing a lot of clothing brands at the time. 10 years ago, there was lots of like really interesting clothing brands coming out. And when we were moving into our East Rock apartment, we were literally, Fred and I were like literally building furniture out of necessity. We were like, we need desks and tables, and we found out we both build furniture as a hobby. And kind of through that experience, we were like, why are we going to IKEA and having bad experiences? And why are we building our own furniture in our garage? Why are we not excited by brands in the furniture space like we are in the clothing space, where we had seen lots of companies, e-commerce companies, really develop like hip brands that people were excited about. And so it was sort of one of these things where it happened slowly, and we kind of started talking about this idea and these pain points, and really started building a company that we would be excited to buy ourselves. So at the time, I think we were building a company for us and people like us, and we said, oh, there's other people like us. And I think as it developed, we started to learn from customers of what they were willing to pay and what things excited them and didn't excite them. We eventually pivoted to do commercial furniture, so now we sell all of our furniture to offices and hotels and restaurants. But I think it really stemmed from a place of, just excitement around bad options and making something that was more exciting both for us and others, that people would buy and say, wow, like I really love that table. I'm gonna go show it off to my friend, something like that. So.
Yeah, I think my story is similar in that solving your own problem, I think, is a common pattern and trend in terms of starting your own company. And in terms of how EdLyft started, so even before coming to Yale, I actually had never heard of Silicon Valley. I'd never touched code before in my life. And I just stumbled upon a documentary about Silicon Valley and all the big tech companies and code and how it was in everything we touched, but there were so few people who looked like me in the industry. And I was like, whoa, how is that possible? It's literally taking over the future. I have to try it. And so that's how I ended up at Yale, wanting to major in computer science, but having never coded before. And the way I describe that experience a little bit, not to scare anyone, but it felt like getting punched in the face multiple times. I don't know if anyone's taken, their first computer science class. It's a bit of a steep learning curve when you're brand new to it. And that was kind of part of the problem that we wanted to solve with EdLyft and making it more approachable because it's the industry of the future. But while I was at a computer science panel like this at Yale, an alumni who was the then president of Y Combinator, the accelerator that I ended up doing many years down the road, came to give a talk to the computer science majors. And I was so captivated when he talked about kind of startups and how if you want to change the world and you have a problem you want to solve, here are many people he's helped do it. And after the panel, he kind of pulled me to the side because I was the only black girl at the time in the audience. And he said, what are you doing next summer? And I was like, I'm going to be a software engineer at Facebook. I'm so excited. And he was like, F that. Like, whoa, everyone's so proud of me. I'm like, why do you say that? And he was like, if you want to make impact on the world, how are you solving problems for people like you? And I was excited to build code that touched billions of people, and he pushed me and challenged me to think about having impact in a different way. And that was the first time that I really saw myself as an entrepreneur and being able to have this different path. And so fast forward, I still ended up going full-time into product management at LinkedIn, but on the side, I kept working on these side projects. And eventually that led into applying to YC, but I'll go into more of that later. That's kind of my entrance into becoming a founder.
Beautiful. Awesome. So I think for me, right before I started grad school at Yale, I kind of transitioned into a plant-based diet. And I was realizing as I was kind of just thinking through man, what are the different kind of foods I can prepare for myself and whatnot? I just wasn't seeing a lot of culturally relevant plant-based options. And so growing up at a very Ghanaian home, plantains were a staple. And Kelewele itself, long before it was the name of my business, is a Ghanaian street food of ripe plantains kind of marinated in spices and ginger and like fried to golden perfection. And you typically eat it with ground nuts. And it was incredible. It was like my favorite thing growing up. And so I was inspired to think about what are the different dishes I can make from this food that I loved that would more so speak to the kinds of foods that I'd be interested in eating anyways and were more kind of culturally relevant. And then fast forward, you know, when I was in my like Anthro 101 classes and just thinking about, for so many anthropologists, the kind of key question is, what is culture? What is the culture concept? How is culture kind of reproduced, recreated? And then even when you think about that, how identity, personal and communal identities get created. And food is a medium by which you can think about culture. And so I kind of had this light bulb moment of, wow, like plantains are more than just plantains, especially when you think about the fact that so many different cultures have plantains as a staple in the diet. I'm West African, the next person can be from the Caribbean or from Latin America. And we're all eating plantains. And so I saw it as a narrative of kind of community togetherness and connection. And as you think about food not just being economic, but social and cultural as well. And so I was just kind of interested to kind of build a bigger story about plantains, but then also just like bring some joy into the world. Like when you hear about plantain ice cream or plantain cookies, like who doesn't want that, you know? And so that was the impetus, I think, for me. It started just like a personal need and solving a personal problem around having more accessible options, but then also building a really kind of beautiful conversation around this one food item that evokes, you know, ideas about identity and community making as well.
What's so beautiful about the stories that each of you have is that you have your unique entry into the idea of being an entrepreneur. And it's really based on passion, not necessarily an acquired skill set. So I didn't hear in your story, Ben, that you became a carpenter and, and you're not an expert chef, and that wasn't part of your experience, but bringing your culture, your struggle with your academic experience was what pushed you into your specific idea. So once you launched your idea, maybe we can start with Erika. Once you started to get this, the ball rolling on your innovation, how did you know that you were going to really go in and invest? And invest your time, invest your money, sometimes the money of others, often the money of others, in order to really dig into this idea?
Yeah, I think a fact that really changed my perspective on being a founder and starting a company is that, does anyone know the #1 killer of startups? Anyone? 99% of startups die because they never launch, right? Like you have this idea, but you never tell the world about it. You never release that first version. And I think once I heard that, that really pushed me to think about, okay, what's the first version of EdLyft that I can get out? And so, you know, our AI tutor that we ended up selling to Google last year is very far from what we launched. And actually the first version of EdLyft wasn't even EdLyft. It was my computer science senior thesis. Oh. It was a project that I started at Yale, and what kind of launched that was while I was at LinkedIn, I asked the head of product during a summer internship, if you had one more year left of school, what would you do differently? And he told me I would build something people want. And I took that advice and I ran with it. And for my computer science senior thesis, I thought about my own problem and being able to, you know, have more resources and role models I could relate to. And that became the project that I ended up doing the Yale Summer Fellowship with the summer after I graduated from Yale. And it was actually in that program where what was just a project started to become reality, where I had to pitch it. I had to talk to people about it. I had to launch that first website, which was very scary at first. But it was when I launched that first version, it was called Repunity at the time. It had a terrible name, Representational Community. Eventually, it turned into Zamella. But that first iteration of the app and the website, which kind of Yale pushed me to go out of my comfort zone led me to realizing there were lots of other people who found value in it. And of course, there was lots that I needed to fix with it, but hearing from friends and friends of friends who were able to solve their own problem using it made me realize, there's something here, and it's worth pursuing, even if it's not the version that comes 7-8 years down the road.
Rachel?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think for me, especially starting, it was so important to be able to validate every decision, especially with resources limited, and then also kind of doing it as a full-time, doctoral student and all of these kind of other pressures as well. It was very much so, okay, I've got this idea and I'm so excited about these plantain desserts and treats and whatnot, but it's like, all right, let's ground this in actual customer validation around what's gonna be useful. And so every decision to pour more resources into what I was doing was always with the understanding and that validation of people are wanting to see this, or people are wanting to see these products in these places. And so that would always guide the decisions that I was making as a way to kind of just make sense of it all, especially as someone who's not a trained chef, right? Or who doesn't just have the experience of, being a serial entrepreneur or what have you. And so that was a big piece for me and how I kind of started the journey. And even to this day, how I continue it, it's really more so staying really close to the pulse of what people are wanting that dictates the direction and the investment as well. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your start?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so we kind of came up with this idea of this hip e-commerce furniture company, and we started applying for various grants that Yale had. We're like, okay, we have this idea, this business idea, let's throw the idea out there and apply for some grants. And we literally got rejected by every single thing we applied to. And we're kind of oh man, maybe this isn't such a good idea. I don't know, we kept getting feedback it's interesting idea, cool market, but you guys aren't quite there yet. And I think a pivotal point for us was over the winter break. We were we think this is a good enough idea that we really want to actually try it out. So we built a website. We kind of did the same thing. We were let's build a website, even if it's really horrible. We're not very good at building furniture, but we enjoy it. We build furniture as a hobby. Let's build the desks that we want to sell ourselves, put them on the website and try to sell them. So we really kind of put ourselves out there. And again, I still have screenshots of the old website, and the logo was made with a pencil sketch. It was horrible. It was really bad. The product was bad. Everything was bad. But the idea of putting that out there and getting our first sale was really, really powerful for us. And I think to your point, those incremental improvements that you say, the first product's gonna be bad, but we're gonna put it out there, and the next day we're gonna try to make it a little bit better, and the next month it's gonna be a little bit better. And over a long period of time, for us 10 years, it's you make your marketing better, your website's better, the product's better. You just get better at making these little incremental improvements. And then you look back and people are how did you build this thing? And you're well, it took a really long time of bad things before it. Mm-hmm. And really interestingly, I think too, for people applying for grants and things, interestingly, I think people started taking us more seriously when we put the product out there. It was almost kind of a Ben and Fred are crazy enough to start this furniture company. We thought it was just kind of a fun side hustle idea, but they're invested enough to do it that they built the site and built tables in their garage and put it out there. Even though that's not we were never going to do that long term, but it kind of showed that we were excited about it. And I think that's been true of our company all throughout. We're kind of scrappy and figure things out and make the best we can with the money we have and incremental improvements. And so yeah, that's kind of how we got started.
Yeah, so it sounds like the bravery and being able to start something that's completely different from what you expected of yourself, even at the beginning, but also to iterate, change, improve constantly is part of your secret to success. But I think what I'm hearing too is that putting it out in the world in the first place is really what makes you, kind of pushes you to a successful place. Absolutely. What I'm not hearing is that any of you saw yourself as entrepreneurs to begin with, though. So maybe Rachel, tell us a little bit about being an entrepreneur. Did you see yourself, I don't think you saw yourself as one, and what it means now to you to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, it's funny. It's still a identifier that I don't really use. I think it's more so, I'm a storyteller, and I just have different mediums by which I tell stories. And so I think even to this idea around like, there's that common thread of wanting to solve a problem, for example, whether it's a personal problem or community problem or what have you. That's more so the language that I've kind of used to identify myself. And so if it shows up through entrepreneurship of telling stories or solving problems, great, that works. And there's, of course, like the learning curve that comes with that. But I think that staying really curious about different stories I want to tell or different problems I want to solve has what's really enriched, I think, the entrepreneurial experience for me, you know, and getting comfortable with that title. Yeah.
I love that. The storyteller piece is really powerful. I think similarly, I would always consider myself a hacker or a problem solver. But really, I say I'm the perfect combination of both my parents, in that my dad is a serial entrepreneur who has probably over like 500 domain names, like, you know, like toiletsigns.com, like literally anything you could think of. He's always been the kind of guy who's always trying to think of business ideas. And then my mom is really big in social justice and nonprofit work, and was the first Black woman city council person of our neighborhood. And I always thought of myself as, how can I bring those two worlds together and build a business that doesn't only do good, but also does well, and kind of being the combination of them too. But despite that, it still took years for me to actually go from kind of the mindset of I need to get a stable 9-to-5 job to I'm gonna quit my 6-figure job and start from scratch. Like, that jump can be really scary, and I think a lot of people call it kind of the golden handcuffs of working, in that you rely on your paycheck, you have maybe kids, you have a family, and another piece of advice that I got that helped me get to that place of becoming an entrepreneur was, I was starting to think about quitting my job, and I had asked a senior leader, again at LinkedIn, kind of, if you were to start a company, what would you want to see, or what would need to be true? And he said, I don't take people seriously unless they've done these 3 things. And he said, 1, do your startup math, which means calculate how much do you need, for 6 months of living expenses to save up, so that if something were to go wrong, you have that emergency savings. So what's your number, Erika? And I was like, I don't know. He was like, okay, well, go figure that one out. 2, make a list of, everyone that you think is smarter than you, that you would love to work with, and then convince one of them to join you. And I was like, oh, okay, that one I have done. And she ended up becoming my co-founder. And then 3 is kind of starting to talk to customers and validating your idea. And after doing those 3 things, that's when I felt like, okay, here's the checklist that I need to be true in order to make the jump, because it's so easy to continue pushing off that idea, like next year will be better, next year will be better. And so making that startup plan, I think, was the best thing that I could have done to actually see myself as an entrepreneur.
Terrific, wow.
Yeah, and for me, it's funny, I think as an entrepreneur, you're kind of, you're like mediocre at a lot of things, and you work with people who are like really good at lots of different, like way better than you in lots of things, but you have to be like kind of good in a lot of things, so you sort of see yourself as like, I'm not that good at marketing, but like I have to do a little marketing. I'm not that good at sales, but I have to do a lot of sales. You kind of like get pretty good at a lot of different things, and you kind of have to. I think I look back to at like, preparation for being an entrepreneur or like owning a business, and I didn't think about it at the time, but some of my past jobs of like, like the internship at some like corporate firm had like very, very little impact on what I do now. But my job waiting tables, my job being like a pedicab in DC for a summer, my job teaching, honestly, like I look back on it and I'm like, I had a classroom in a group of students. I had to teach them math every day, but I got to decide what I did and what I taught. And I thought that autonomy translates a lot of like, you have, students and customers and like listening to them and continuously improving your craft and things like that, rather than having like a boss who tells you like, this is what you need to do and get better. You kind of have to craft that on your own. So I do look back at some of my past experience and I think, oh, that's really interesting. Those things help me. Like waiting tables help me do sales. And I think as an entrepreneur, you're constantly selling your idea, your product, but you're also selling people on like really smart, amazing people to come work for you. And like, that's a big part of being an entrepreneur is like you're doing sales, not just a product, but of your whole company. And so yeah, you kind of develop the skill over time if you do it for long enough. And yeah, it's fun being an entrepreneur.
Well, so I'm going to take you back in time to your time here at Yale. So again, one of the things I mentioned early on is all of our entrepreneurs today participated in the Sci-City Summer Fellowship, which is a full-time opportunity for students to focus on their ventures and be fully supported during that time. So can you tell us a little bit about what that time meant to you? I think, Erika, you mentioned it first, that it was a time when you started to really develop your website and launch your idea. But how was that concentrated time to focus on your venture? Did it inspire you to do more? Did it give you time to focus? What were the benefits of such participation? Maybe Erika, you could start.
Yeah, I touched on this a little bit, but I think if I had to boil it down to three main things, and quite tactically speaking, the first one was launching the LLC. Right? Like that can be a very daunting thing. I had no idea how to do that, where to start, and it's very specific, but I remember the actual talk with the lawyer who was brought in during the summer fellowship that made such a scary thing very simple, and having access to that resource made that, a two-week process and someone I could go to. And so just being able to launch the entity, tactically speaking, was very helpful. Second, I would say the community. You are who you are around. And I think the more time I spent with other aspiring entrepreneurs, other actual entrepreneurs, the more easily I was able to see myself as one. And so that community became my friends, became who I would talk to about sales and hiring and, hey, like, what are you using for, your website builder? And so people you could exchange resources with. And then third and lastly, I would say what I touched on earlier, which is getting your product out there so that you can get feedback. Something that I always kind of repeated to myself as a mantra later on as an entrepreneur was, if I'm not doing one of these three things as a founder, I'm wasting my time, which is talking to users, building for my users, or selling to users. And I think within the summer fellowship, we were required to do those three things and constantly be getting feedback or build or sell in a way that when you're doing it on the side, you get distracted by other things. And this was very focused time to make a lot of progress. And so for me, that was literally what led to the launch of the website, which then eventually led to the launch of our app that became the Apple app of the day one day. So you just never know where these small steps could take you.
Yeah, I'd say for me, right before the fellowship, Kelewele was in a kind of pop-up model. And so it was doing very much like grassroots, like festivals, different kind of corporate events for the most part, but had the opportunity to go brick and mortar. And that, it felt like a new launch right as I was also starting the fellowship. And so the fellowship space just became like my reprieve in so many ways, because as I was hiring a full team for the first time, just trying to source equipment, I can remember like being on the phone with Abby, and she's like helping me figure out where I can buy like a commercial oven from. And then I'd be on the phone with my advisor, and he's like, don't worry, a win's around the corner, like it's gonna be okay. And so just to have, and I also was in the fellowship during COVID, and so it was a fully virtual experience, but still the level of community and the connectivity was top tier. And so it really became the space by which I was literally actioning everything I was learning in real time for the brick and mortar. And then also, I think at that time, getting tapped to also have a kind of shop at the Barclays Center while I was also building the brick and mortar. And so I was like, how am I gonna do all of this? And so it was like in real time, lessons, learning, actioning it, implementation all at once. So it was pivotal for me at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely very similar for us. I feel like it took this kind of idea and sort of like hobbyist thing and sort of made it into like a real company by the end of the summer. And 100% agree with the like forming an LLC. And we're like, wow, there's like, we have a LLC, like a real name, and we can like apply for, I don't know, we have a federal ID number and all those little things. But then, I think the bigger thing is for us was time, just having like, when you're a student, you're like running between classes, and then it's like spend an hour on the business, and then it's like next class, and you're always thinking about the business, but having this like extended period of time to just solely work on the company really kind of helped us get to the next level. And it's similarly like finding our supply chain. It's like, well, Fred and I aren't going to be making the furniture. Let's figure out like who are the key partners to help us actually build the furniture that we're going to sell to other people. How are we going to make the website better? And then again, doing it with other founders. It's so funny that across there's all these different. There's like I think there were 10 different companies in our group. Everyone was doing completely different things, but they're all so similar. Like businesses are so similar in terms of the problems, the general problem that you have of like sales or marketing or whatever it is. It's like it's very similar between industries. It's just a different customer, a different like exact problem, but the general theme is there. And so I think being able to bounce ideas off of each other and just talk through, a challenge you're having was really helpful, as well as having other entrepreneurs, come back and kind of, there was like entrepreneurs in residence. And I always remember there was one guy who came and every day he would go to every team for a full week and he would say, how many sales did you guys get today? How many sales did you get today? How many sales did you? He would come around and like it was the idea of that like he knew that not everyone was going to get a sale that day, but he also knew that changing that framework of like what if I told you had to get a sale next week? Ooh. Could you do it? And the answer for most of the companies was actually like probably like, and so he would say, well, what do you have to do to get there? And so I remember like entrepreneurs like that who were further along. They were like 5-10 years down the road. They really helped, I think, guide us and think about the right questions and right things to be asking. Because I think, to your point, a lot of times, like if you don't lift off the ground, you kind of stay in this sort of steady state that you're just sort of, it's always an idea. And sometimes it takes that little push to like get it off the ground and like sell that first product to somebody is like very powerful. So yeah, very, very helpful to us.
So many students who are alumni of the summer fellowship talk about mentorship as a highlight and the network as a highlight. And so two of you already have mentioned that your mentors, whether they were your peer network or entrepreneurs in residence, really pushed you to think differently about your idea or pushed you to have conversations that were going to move you forward. Can you tell us a little bit about how the network that you established at the summer fellowship, or maybe throughout Yale's entrepreneurial ecosystem is vast now between the Yale Entrepreneurial Society, the School of Management, and so many other entities. How have those, the people within those networks, be they mentors or peers, how have you utilized them to help in your success? Maybe Ben, you want to? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think one of the big unfair advantages of a place like Yale is that there's a community of people that wants to help you, both current students, professors, alums, like everyone wants to see you succeed. And it's just, even though it's a fairly big school, like you can email basically anyone from Yale and say, hey, I'm a student starting this company, and they'll take a call with you, like big, small, like have the biggest company in the country, like it doesn't matter. Like people are so helpful and responsive. And I think we had a lot of mentors that were kind of like, like 1 year ahead of us. That I always found them the most helpful, actually. Like they're just like a little bit ahead of you, and they help you see like, here's where I am now and here's where I'm trying to get to. And like, it's a little bit of an easier jump to get there. Sometimes you'll hear someone talk that has like, they've started 20 companies and they're like billion-dollar companies, and you're like, wow, that feels so far off that it's hard to connect to. So I think we found a lot of value in people that were in our shoes like 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years to kind of help guide us and maybe like what we should be doing. And then the other thing is we had lots of some of our first commercial sales were Yale alums that had recently started a company. Like one was this company Common. They were doing fully furnished apartments for young professionals in Brooklyn. Oh. And we were like, we're building furniture, you're building places that need furniture. And there's kind of like a friendly face where it's hard to make a sale to someone that like doesn't know you and you don't have a lot to show, but sometimes people are willing to take a risk. So I think even in terms of the network, like someone we don't know, but they went to Yale and they're like, you know what, I think this is going to work out. And that little jump helps you get to the next jump. So I think it's a big unfair advantage to have this incredible network of people that you can kind of lean on for support and mentorship, but even for like growing the business.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Honestly, just +1 to everything Ben said. I think, the only different thing I could add is just the actual faculty and resources during the summer fellowship. I remember constantly signing up for office hours with, I think it was Oni at the time, and maybe Cassie if she's still here, but just having a person that you could bounce your ideas off of, like, oh, I'm thinking about kind of changing this flow. What are your thoughts? Or can you actually test this for me if you want to do usability testing? So having people, again, who are rooting for you, who are a resource, who you can reach out to was invaluable, and a different kind of mentorship. And then I already talked about my mentor who kind of literally opened the floodgates to startups for me, who was Michael Seibel at the time, who was a Yale alumni, who just really pushed me to think of myself outside of just being a software engineer and going into Silicon Valley, and pushing me to think of myself as someone who could create change in a different way. And so constantly having those relationships with alumni, you never know truly what doors it could open.
Yeah, I would echo all of that. I think the one thing I would add is that I think the Yale ecosystem presents a very gentle place to build a tough skin, and so even when I was in the fellowship and while my mentor advisor was very kind, he also would just be real with me about, I think you're thinking about this unrealistically, or I think it's also just like the benefit of being in conversation with people who have some distance from the business that you are very passionate about and naturally have emotional ties to. And so people who can just give you a sobering kind of, view or interpretation of things was so helpful to me. And it can be tough sometimes to hear things that are challenging or points where you gotta kind of develop and work on from a sustainability perspective as well. But I think that, and knowing that the people are well-intentioned, which again is like the great thing about the Yale ecosystem, helps a lot. So
I love that you build your skin, your toughness from the impact of people who care for you, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that's beautiful. So I'm wondering, how do you engage that network of mentors now? Do you still keep in touch? Are they? Do you see them, talk with them weekly? Are they still part of your support system?
Well, yeah, my mentor from Yale, absolutely. We would have quarterly existential crisis calls.
I loved it.
Hey, we have this much runway left. We could do A or B. Let's talk through the options. So just having someone you could call who has seen the entire journey, whom you trust, I really appreciated and didn't take lightly. There are fellow Yale entrepreneurs who would read over our Y Combinator application, and I'm thinking about using this software for our taxes. Have you used it? So those kind of trade secrets was really helpful. But I think just so many ways, even with sales, if you see a Yale alumni and reaching out to them, you're in a position that you can introduce me to someone. If there's one advice I would have about using the Yale network, it's introductions are king for being an entrepreneur. Like someone who can introduce you to your next investor, to your next hire, to your next sale. Like that is so powerful and a way to not necessarily have like a transactional relationship, but also, it be kind of mutually beneficial and really make the most of the Yale name and help move your business forward in a tremendous way.
Yeah, I would just add, as I still live in New Haven and just outside of New Haven, and I've also found I have the lucky advantage of being close by, and there's students come and go, but there's this core group of faculty that's been here for a long time, and you bump it, they're all rooting for you and cheering on for you and introducing you, and it's great bumping into people in the neighborhood and around, and just having this group that cares a lot. And it's funny, our email newsletter, even our mentors 10 years ago that were part of our group, they'll sometimes respond to a newsletter and be like, hey, I know it's been a long time, but been rooting for you and looking at your stuff, and I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even realize that they were still watching us. So it's pretty cool to see this group that's supports you even, even sometimes you don't know that they are. So.
That, again, speaks to the impact that so many of you are making with your entrepreneur, your pathways, right, through these entrepreneurial products and and strategies is that not only are you touching people who you don't know yet, but the people who you do know and have been part of your foundation from the beginning. So it's amazing that you continue to keep them in your network. So I'm going to start to ask a few questions about, I think, the thing that most people here wonder about, and that's money. So mentorship and advice, it can come for free a lot of times. But the thing that really keeps a business afloat and keeps you moving forward are the funds that keep your people, your human resources going, and keep you acquiring the resources that you need to push through. So for context, Rachel runs her business while working a full-time job. Ben bootstrapped his company, and Erika fundraised after participating in Y Combinator, the accelerator that she mentioned, in March 2020. So quite impressive to do so much work during that tumultuous time. So can you tell us a little bit about, one, how did you pay the bills? How did you decide what was the optimal method for raising funds for your company? How did all of that happen? Maybe we'll start with.
Yeah, sure. I think for me, quality of life was really important and remains really important. I think what's interesting too is when I was in my doctoral program and just kind of had that moment of realization that I didn't want to go the academic route, and I had this kind of like entrepreneurial thing budding. It was like, all right, what's going to fill the gap? Because especially, I think, careers in the social sciences, as just the job market keeps like shrinking and shrinking, I just didn't see a whole lot of opportunities there. But then I also didn't want to like fully jump ship into entrepreneurship because again, it was a question of like living in New York and just having an expectation of what I wanted life to look like. And so that became my kind of like reintroduction to finance and going back to JP Morgan. And so I think early on, it was more so around like, how can I make sure that I feel really comfortable in kind of my lifestyle and just the circumstances that I have, and then also letting that be the foundation, and then helping the business from a funding perspective to do that. Because I knew from the beginning, I need to feel happy and content in order to give my best self to building this business. And so that was kind of my approach. And so I knew that while it is extra taxing, because to have a full-time job and also kind of build a business is a lot, but I also knew that it wasn't going to be from a place where there was just like a scarcity of resources by which to do that. And so that became important to me. But then I think with that are questions that I just had to answer for myself to feel just really kind of confident in the decisions that I was making. I think that entrepreneurship very much gets romanticized a lot of the time. And so I just needed to be real about like, is this something that I want when I'm in the trenches of it? Like, am I gonna be good with this choice that I've made to like go pursue this exclusively, you know? And so, yeah, just getting very real about that, and then also being good with the reality that there's really no shame in choosing different paths and kind of mix matching like how you want things to look. Like to have a full-time job while also kind of build a business, those things can happen and coincide. And you know, it's more so questions around what's your time horizon? Like when is it that you want to be able to execute on certain goals that you have? And is the lifestyle or the conditions that you've set gonna allow you to do that? You know, and so just kind of pacing myself in a way that felt comfortable really became then the direction by which I was funding the business, but also like funding the life that I wanted to live, as I also, I think that training of getting some emotional distance to the business really shaped my view and perception then of how I would treat it and operate it. Yeah.
I needed that advice when I was starting. Oh my God. No one mentions the quality of life piece. I think that's very real and not talked about enough. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. On our side, so for EdLyft, we were very, very intentional about the way we were going to fund the business. One, I think being in Silicon Valley shaped our perception of how you fund businesses. I think a lot are through venture capital, and so I wish I had known about more avenues, kind of looking back at it. But my co-founder was also a fellow Black woman, and we were very practical about the stats, right? Less than 0.1% of venture capital goes to Black women. And so it was very important for us. She, excuse me, comes from a family who, if you're not a doctor, a lawyer, or a very traditional career path, like God forbid. And it was very important that we had kind of that stable income as we think about growing a business. And so in order to increase our chances of success for raising venture capital, that's why we chose to go the accelerator route. And so it was really important for us to go through Y Combinator for our business because we knew the stats for raising venture capital would be higher, and our chances of being able to raise would be increased with that network. And so that's why we chose to go the accelerator route. It has its trade-offs with your equity, of course, but then what we thought would be easy with the accelerator ending in March 2020, obviously that no one could have predicted what was to come. And so we started our fundraise. We still went through with it because, again, I knew the stats were against us already. I wasn't scared. And it was tough. I did over 200 investor pitches, and 170 of those were no's, which is really, really hard. And kind of building up that tenacity just took a lot of practice, but in the end was worth it. On Juneteenth of 2020, that's when we closed our $1.3 million round, and we were able to then hire our team that led us to where we were. But it just takes a lot of no's to get to those yeses, and being able to know what you need for your business to get to that next level.
Totally. And yeah, I really think there's no right way to do this. And I remember in the early days, there's almost this I would say pressure of oh, you need to be all in or raise money or do that. There's a little bit of pressure actually on the way to do it. And I think there really is, it's dependent on life circumstances that's going to open up certain opportunities or not. And Fred and I were lucky that we had spouses with stable jobs who we could be on their health care. That was really helpful because it gave us a little bit of runway to say okay, we don't need to raise money because our business is actually not a very good one for raising money. We're not gonna go make venture capitalists a lot of money probably. We're kind of a slow growth business. So one was our business is kind of like that. Two, we had a life circumstance that allowed us to have health care and we're living in small apartments and we're able to do that. I think we're also we decided to bootstrap it partially. So some of it came because of, again, our company is not necessarily a good fit. Some of it came because we're kind of a slow, we've always known this is gonna be a company that takes a while to build and develop the right way. And so yeah, we just kind of went for it, and it meant that it was hard. So in the early years, it was really hard because we graduated from school. Our spouses have these jobs, but we have to obviously contribute too. So it really forced us to go make the business work because we didn't have another choice. It was kind of if we got to the end of a year and it was we just don't have enough sales to make this actually work, then we were gonna have to figure something else out and get another job. I feel we always just barely eked by. We were always just it was we weren't making enough at the beginning, but we're making just enough to make it work. And that gave us the kind of momentum to get to the next stage. And now we're kind of at a place where we're able to, we've grown the sales to a point where we're it's a little bit more stable. But I will say another thing that, I think is helpful to know is that you don't, even 10 years out, and it's become very clear, probably not 20 years, even 30 years, you don't hit this thing where you've made it, where it's oh, now we're comfortable and have good sales. It's if anything, it gets harder. It gets harder because now you have a team, and so you need more sales to support the team. And so it's just a really interesting thing to just kind of, there isn't kind of a making it point. It's just you grow, there's new problems, et cetera. And we feel very lucky that we've been able to bootstrap it the whole time. I think it makes you deploy your money very carefully because it's you don't have any money. So every little dollar you spent, it's especially in the early days, it's do we buy the thank you postcards or not? Now, it's now those decisions are kind of bigger, but it's the same thing. We have to be very careful with who we hire, how we hire them, make sure they're a really good fit because we can't make too many mistakes when you bootstrap. So yeah.
Well, the other point that you all make in these varied ways that you tell this story is one, iteration on your product. So each of you have described that your products are not what you initially imagined them to be. And in your storytelling now, it also sounds like success isn't what you originally imagined it to be. So can you describe what success is to you now at this stage in your founder journey, in your entrepreneurial journey, either for your foundation, your startup itself, or for you?
Wow, that's really deep.
Yeah, very.
It's funny, I was talking to a group of like post-exit founders in New York City, and one said something that just I resonated so deeply with, which is selling your startup is like at the end of a video game, where your character is just like, okay, where do I go now? What do I do? What's the goal? So I just really resonate with that, and I think for the past year, a lot of my journey has been kind of redefining what success looks like for me. I think there's a lot of ego and identity crisis around like, who am I? Am I more than my company? That's the baby that I spent the last 6, 7, 10 years building. And so what does success look like beyond that? I think if you were to ask me 2 years ago while we were in the midst of crossing $1 million in revenue and growing the team, I would say success looks like having as maximum impact on the number of college students studying computer science, and success was very tied to our mission and outsized return for our investors. But I think on the other side, success for me looks like continuing to find meaning and happiness in life, and I'm still on that journey, to be honest.
No, I feel that. I think I've also been in this journey of making sure success is not a self-serving purpose or self-serving in orientation, because I mentioned earlier about that validation piece of making sure whatever it is that I'm doing is backed by what people are wanting and people are asking for. And so I think for me, success is this speaking to a need, or is it creating more joy or happiness for people? And if it's not, to be okay with shifting and pivoting and kind of moving differently to make sure that, again, it's like every decision is tied to kind of a communal impact. And so that's been how I, think about success now. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's sort of changed, especially in the last couple of years of, we, for a long time, especially because we bootstrapped, we were like, even 2 years ago, we were 3 people, and now we're 10 people, and that was a big leap in the last couple of years. And I think as we have a bigger team, part of success that sort of started to develop is like creating a great company that like our employees love working at, our suppliers love working with us. Like we're giving jobs to people who love making furniture because we're bringing sales to them. It's sort of like peripheral things of creating a company where like people could spend their whole career there and be really excited to do that. We decided to become 1% for the Planet members and donate 1% of revenues every year to environmental nonprofits. We're a certified B Corp. That's become like really, really important to like what gets us up every day. It's not just the furniture. Like in 2 weeks, we're gonna go to West Virginia and like literally put trees in the ground, and we've replanted over 100,000 trees in West Virginia. And it's like, that's very motivating beyond just the sale, that like, you get sales and you're like, there's gonna be a tract of land in West Virginia that gets put into conservation and trees grow on it. And 30 years from now, we can go back and like see those trees. That's very motivating. So I think like these peripheral things have become more important, or become like more top of mind in terms of success of like creating this space that other people can, have the company be a place that they call home and family, et cetera. So
it's beautiful. So I think we have a few minutes for question and answer period from questions from the audience. So Cassie will. Oh, we don't have time for question and answer. Okay. Okay. Well, with that then, Erika, Rachel, Ben, thank you so much for all that you've done, all that you've shared with us here today, and your valuable insights. It's been an amazing discussion, and I'm sure everyone in the audience has learned so much from your stories. I want to thank our panelists for sharing their journeys, and thank our audience for participating in this panel and part of this conversation. And now we'll hand it over to Cassie. Sorry.